And then he drops out after a catastrophic debate performance. And they set Kamala Harris up to fail. That was a 3-month campaign, and she was supposed to introduce herself to the American people. No wonder people were Googling, did Joe Biden drop out? And so...
No. No. You're saying 3 months wasn't long enough? It was too long. It was long enough. It was long enough.
If they had a primary...
It's not that they didn't have time to introduce. They met someone they didn't like them.
If they had had a primary, they wouldn't have picked her. And if they had, she would have been able...
Here we go again. Another round of self-proclaimed intellectuals marching onto the stage like they've got the wisdom of the ages. Spoiler alert, they didn't bring facts, they brought feelings. And then came the hammer of reality, smashing their smug confidence in record time. One sharp line flipped the script, leaving the audience roaring while the experts sat frozen, eyes wide like deer caught in headlights. You know how elections are, raw emotions, endless finger-pointing, constant excuses. Some folks still haven't moved past the sting of losing, so they're throwing everything at the wall. Media spin? Check. Big tech backup? Check. Corporations parroting slogans? Double check. And when all else fails, comedy skits. The problem? Reality doesn't bend to hashtags or punchlines. One sketch tried to dunk on Trump, but the clapback was swift and brutal. The crowd wasn't laughing at the jokes. They were cheering the takedown.
Saw Kamala was on Saturday Night Live, as the losing candidate often is. It worked so well for Hillary. Let's run that back. And it just made me think, I'm sure every single member of the Saturday Night Live cast was a Harris supporter. But what if one of them wasn't? What if one of those cast members was for Trump? Would they have felt comfortable saying so? I really don't think so. They would have had to keep it to themselves. That's not a good place for us to be. I remember when... And that happens even more on the left.
The so-called woke mob is still writhing in pain because their favorite candidate didn't win the election. But you know what's worse? They've turned into sore losers, constantly throwing shade and trashing Trump's presidency at every chance they get. From late-night comedy skits to endless social media rants, it's like Orange Man Bad has become their full-time career. And when facts don't back their outrage, they just crank up the volume, hoping nobody notices there's no substance behind the noise. But here's the real question. If Trump is such a loser, why can't they stop talking about him? It's almost an obsession disguised as activism. Even more ridiculous is the excuse we've heard, that Democrats only lost because they couldn't get their message out in time. Really? After all the media coverage, tech platforms, and corporate support, they still claim no one heard them? Please, that excuse doesn't fly.
You have to be authentic. You can't reverse engineer any of this off a blueprint. And I really think this is true about politics. Steve Jobs once said, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. It's our job. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Barack Obama off of George W. Bush. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Donald Trump off of Barack Obama. What happens in the end of an election is everyone sifts through the data and they come up with their perfect, their plan based on, well, this worked and with this group and we got attack here and there. And what politics about is a certain point is innovation and communication. You got to come up with new stories and new ways of telling
this Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Or maybe I'm paraphrasing, but that's it. And I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
Looks like this guy borrowed straight from the political playbook. String together a bunch of vague phrases, toss in some dramatic pauses, and call it a message. The result? A whole lot of words that say absolutely nothing. Funny thing is, it's not even supposed to be the job of politicians to tell people who to vote for. That would be undemocratic, right? Yet somehow that's exactly what they tried to do. But the audience wasn't buying the word salad. The voters already heard the so-called message, understood it perfectly, and flat out rejected it. Turns out, recycled slogans and lofty promises don't win elections. Here's the kicker. If the message was really that strong, why keep shouting it over everyone else? Why drown out the room instead of letting it stand on its own? Just when you thought the nonsense had peaked, he dropped a so-called shocker.
I think that I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had a moment across the political spectrum of some form of progressive communication that's either left them bewildered or a little I don't know about that. But I also think at the same time, there is a message of what I would call common sense, patriotic pluralism. Yeah. That is a majority message, which is If some father and mother have health care for their kid lined up who's trans, just stay the fuck out of their business. And let them make that decision. That's their decision to make. And you don't have to make that for your family. I'm not going to tell you what to do with your family.
But the argument is whether the child should make the decision.
But the child is never making the decision. The parents are always making the decision. Parents consent to medical care.
Well, here in California, you're allowed to hide it from the parents if the kid is.
Yes.
Thank you, one person who knows that.
But I mean,
somebody knows that is the case.
Once again, here we go with the same tired routine, muddying the waters and shifting the goalposts like it's some kind of Olympic sport. But here's the uncomfortable truth. In many places, minors are being allowed to make life-altering decisions about transitioning without parental consent. And it's not being hidden either. It's on record. Even worse, kids are being encouraged to keep it secret from their own parents while schools take on the role of counselor, doctor, and even judge. Think about the irony. Parents need to sign a permission slip for something as small as a school trip, yet when it comes to a permanent medical decision, suddenly the same parents are cut out of the process. Who's really protecting the children here? Because it doesn't look like it's the parents. And when it comes to free speech, the pattern continues. Disrupting talks just because you disagree isn't empowerment, it's censorship dressed up as activism.
Surely there's a portfolio of jokes that would still work on a college campus. Surely.
I would hope not. From what maybe some college campuses, the ones you read about are fucking insane.
You've given up on an entire generation, and you don't know how to make them laugh.
I have given up on any place that doesn't even remotely attempt to believe in free speech and thinks that anything that they hear that they don't like, that they don't agree with, is violence. These people are nuts, and you should be calling them out. Somebody like you, who has standing with kids, should be not joining them.
When there's a science objectivity to it.
You're doing what parents do. You're taking the path of least resistance, and therefore hurting the kids and yourself. Parents ruin both their lives. They ruin their fucking spoiled kids' lives, and they ruin their own lives because the kids rule the roost. So that's what you're doing on a national level.
It looks like common sense has officially left the building. We now live in a world where people seriously claim there are endless genders, as if reality itself is just a menu you can scroll through. At this rate, we'll need a calculator just to keep track. And of course, the latest push is that biological men should be allowed to compete in women's sports, because apparently fairness is outdated. But not everyone is buying it. The nonsense gets called out for what it is, without sugarcoating, without polite disagreements, just straight up reality. Because here's the thing. When the so-called defenders of science start treating basic biology like it's just an opinion, someone has to hit the brakes. And that's exactly what happened. The question practically asks itself, if reality is now considered offensive, where does it end? What's next? Canceling gravity because it pulls too hard.
Scientific American, the magazine. I remember when it was around when I was
grew up with it. Yeah.
Grew up with it.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, their editor had to quit.
Yeah, I heard about it because she expressed some opinions, right?
Sure, but it sure didn't sound scientific. It didn't sound like the person I would want to be running Scientific American.
Okay.
It was a rant on Twitter. Inequity between male and female athletes is the result not of inherent biological differences between the sexes, but of biases in how they are treated in sports. That's nuts. And it sure ain't scientific, and it's in Scientific American. What I'm asking is, Scientific American is saying, basically, that the reason why an WNBA team can't beat the Lakers is because of societal.
Does she still have her job?
No, not because of this. I said the scandal is not her tweet. The scandal,
because that was like a year ago, was it? Which one was a year ago?
I think a year ago, women still couldn't beat men in basketball or any other sport. And it wasn't because of society.
This one has to be the most eye-opening. Imagine a comedian sounding more grounded in science than the actual scientist on stage. That's how far gone things have become. How woke do you need to be to seriously suggest that women can physically outcompete men in professional sports? This isn't about feelings, it's pure biology. And when pressed with a simple, no-nonsense question, could the best women's basketball team realistically defeat an elite men's team? The silence was deafening. Not even the person with all the academic titles and scientific authority could bring themselves to admit the obvious truth. What? Because acknowledging it would shatter the carefully built narrative. It was almost poetic to watch. A supposed expert fumbling over something that's not just theory but observable reality, struggling in a logic trap of their own making. If basic truth is now treated as offensive, what's next? Denying gravity because it pulls too hard? And if comedians can expose that weakness in scientists, Just imagine what happens when politicians face the same heat.
No, it's stuff like there's a new law in this. I think we have way too many regulations and laws, as we've talked about. And this one, I think, says if you're a department store with over 500 employees, you have to have a gender neutral toy department.
Yeah.
Stuff like that.
Yeah, I get it.
So do you think that's silly? Do you think that's a silly thing that we too much government there?
That's an interesting one because the department stores came to us supporting that. And they were the ones making a case for that. They were making us, they're already moving in that direction.
Wanted you to make a law about them?
Well, but they supported the legislation. It wasn't legislation that was enacted, that was initiated, from my office, but it was legislation that came up with interesting support from the industry itself. But I understand how that's exploited and good people can disagree.
If there's a hall of fame for dodging straight answers, this politician would be its main exhibit. He usually speaks like he's delivering a polished TED Talk. Smooth, confident, dripping with self-assurance. But when the spotlight turned to a simple, direct question, the act fell apart. The question wasn't complicated. Is forcing large stores to create gender-neutral toy aisles silly? A simple yes or no would have done the trick. Instead, we got a marathon of circular talking. Long-winded rambling about the origins of the bill, side tangents on inclusivity, and vague references to fairness, all while carefully dodging the obvious. Because here's the thing, when you're trying to defend nonsense, straight answers become dangerous. A yes would upset the activists and a no would reveal how absurd the law really is. So he danced around it like his career depended on the performance. Meanwhile, the host just sat back, half amused, half exasperated, watching him drown in the very word salad he served up. Nothing's funnier than a politician trapped in the spin cycle of their own making.
And we still don't have enough water in the Colorado River and all this stuff. Yeah. And then whenever I read 80% of the water goes to agriculture. Almonds. Right. No one ever asked you about almonds? Oh, I'm going to ask you about almonds. We grow a boatload of almonds.
I'm well aware.
You know how much water it takes?
Many gallons.
1,900 gallons to grow a pound of almonds. Yeah. Come on, man. Take on big almond.
Take on big almond.
I mean, it's not like we don't have the water.
No. You're right about it. It's not that we don't have the water. That said, the last couple of years were tough. I mean, but it's also where the water's falling and we're not capturing it. And we're not capturing those extreme years with these atmospheric rivers. Wets are getting a lot wetter, dry's drier, hot's getting a lot hotter. And so we've got to modernize our conveyance system. We've got to modernize our storage, not just above ground, but below ground.
Some people dodge questions, others bury them under buzzwords. This politician practically turned it into performance art. The question on the table was direct. Why is more than 80% of the state's water being used to grow almonds when almonds only make up 2% of the economy? A fair, straightforward query. But instead of tackling it head-on, he slipped into full-on TED Talk mode. Out came the rehearsed lines about climate change, vague references to global warming, and long detours into storage infrastructure. Everything except the one thing actually being asked. It was less of an answer and more of a verbal smokescreen, designed to dazzle with big phrases while carefully sidestepping the uncomfortable truth. The host didn't even need to press too hard. Just sitting back and letting the word salad pile up was enough. The more he talked, the clearer it became. There was no real answer, only carefully staged distractions. And the irony? For all the chatter about sustainability, he couldn't sustain a single coherent point.
And then he drops out after a catastrophic debate performance, and they set Kamala Harris up to fail. That was a 3-month campaign, and she was supposed to introduce herself to the American people. No wonder people were Googling, did Joe Biden drop out? And so...
No. You're saying 3 months wasn't long enough? It was too long.
I mean, it was long enough.
It was long enough.
If they had a primary...
It's not that they didn't have time to introduce. They met someone and they didn't like them.
If they had a primary, they wouldn't have picked her. And if they had, she would have been able to rough out those edges that then she basically has to start from scratch with a campaign team she didn't hire that didn't like her.
You almost have to admire the creativity it takes to come up with excuses this wild. This guest actually tried to argue that Harris lost because she only had 3 months to campaign. 3 months? Please. If Biden had delivered anything close to decent results over the past 4 years, Harris wouldn't have needed a full campaign. The election should have been a slam dunk. Instead, it was a total airball. But the real jaw-dropper wasn't the timeline excuse. No, it was the claim that Biden's own campaign staff didn't like Harris. Just think about that for a second. If even her own side wasn't convinced by her message, What chance did she really have with the rest of the country? Maybe it wasn't about sexism, sabotage, or short timelines. Maybe Americans just didn't want another 4 years of hollow platitudes and recycled slogans. If Harris couldn't even win the trust of her team, she was never going to win the trust of the voters. And Bill Maher? He wasn't buying it either. He called out the woke spin for exactly what it was.
Everything the candidates, especially the Democrats, do to get voters annoys them. The constant texting. Did you get the texts like from Tim Walz every 5 minutes and like always begging for money and knocking on doors? And we've got people knocking on doors. People don't want knocking on your door. Who in this day and age wants someone knocking on? Kids don't even like it when a phone call. That's like too much of a invasion of their privacy, which they don't care about.
Exactly, Bill. The Democrats didn't just misstep. They went full-on intrusive. They knew Biden had tanked in the polls, Harris wasn't pulling her weight, and panic mode had officially set in. So what did they do? Cook up a desperate last-minute strategy to save a sinking ship. Fair enough, desperate times call for desperate measures, right? But here's the problem. They didn't just campaign, they harassed. Endless texts, constant phone calls, door-knocking that felt more like debt collectors than political volunteers, and non-stop donation begging like broke college kids at semester's end. And surprise, it backfired spectacularly. Because when your outreach feels more like a hostage negotiation, voters check out fast. The irony couldn't be sharper. The same party that screams about consent had zero problem blowing up people's phones, invading their privacy, and essentially annoying the very voters they needed. Nothing says vote for us like making people dread every notification on their screen. In the end, it wasn't just intrusive, it was pathetic. And voters responded the only way they could, by slamming the door shut. That's today's takedown. If you enjoyed it, hit like, subscribe, and stick around for more unapologetic breakdowns. See you in the next one.